Welcome back once again to this Fifth International World Congress on Artificial Intelligence and the Futures of Philosophy, Global Leadership, and World Peace. We're at plenary session panel 7, and the focus of this panel is going to be on the work of our colleague, the inimitable James Maroosis, who, among other things, through the course of his very rich career, aside from doing studies at the Pontifical Institute of Medieval Studies at the University of Toronto, and having worked with Marshall McLuhan up there, and Anton Pegas, and a bunch of the other luminaries on the faculty, has been a member of the Fordham University Graduate School of Business. He's taught over there, has done a lot of work in business ethics that has been recognized in prestigious journals. And he's going to be talking about the liberal arts of management, reading for results. So Jim, I hope you are ready. And if you have a copy of your book that you could show us, if you brought it with you, why don't you bring that up too, because it would be good to be able to live stream that.
Thank you very much, Peter. And here's a copy of my book. Is that on the screen? Okay.
There we go.
Okay. So
It's very small.
it is small.
Which is a good thing, not a bad thing.
I'm here specifically to honor my friend Eric McLuhan, and because we're doing that later, Peter had asked if I would speak about the book also. So I was planning to speak for about 20 minutes. I might speak a little longer, but I don't want to take up the whole hour and a half on my book. This was meant to be a split thing. And you also had asked before we can begin, we'll be doing a Vesper service downstairs that will require the reading of 6 Psalms. And I have 1 reader, I need 5. Okay, so please, right? Okay, now, taking a break from our last session and to try to come into what I'm doing, I have written a book called The Liberal Arts of Management, a Toolkit for Today's Leaders. The book is pointing out, it's not arguing, it's pointing out that the liberal arts were invented by today's managers so they could do their job. Now, I'm not saying reinvented. The Romans had to reinvent cement because they invented it and forgot it. But managers never forgot the liberal arts. They never were taught the liberal arts. So they had to actually create them, not consciously, to be effective. Implicit in that claim is that the arts themselves are incredibly effective tools to expedite and get the right things done. In fact, when we begin to look at the arts in their history, they are deeply moral. And they're not moral because they're philosophical. They're moral because they're oratorical. The essence of ethics in the arts is eloquence. The ability to say and act in a way that is appropriate for the situation. Hopefully to make things better than they are, but minimally to recreate and establish the freshness of the novelty of being alive with other people. That's the key. And the manager, as I understand it, is really a model that goes all the way back to Isocrates, is a model that is articulated by Cicero, is a model that in the Renaissance is articulated by Castiglione. It's alluded to by Erasmus. In the 20th century, Peter Drucker, Mary Parker Follett, and Marshall McLuhan are all very keyed into the managerial task. So I wrote this book. This book was meant to be 400 pages long and to be an integration and an articulation of learning for today. But who would be interested in a book that talks about the relationship between Peter Drucker, Cicero, and Castiglione? And how do I explain Thomistic metaphysics to people who are managers, or the question of ethics? It's truly an impossible task. So what I wrote here is a book that's meant, it's a great book for freshmen and for early MBA students and for people who are working right now and don't really know what they're doing with their lives, to realize, wait a second, I'm doing something really valuable. I personally don't believe we're that far off from being incredible again. I don't think the problems we're facing are technological problems. I think the problems we're facing are managerial problems, but not managerially and as techne. This is not about how do I cope. This is about how do I continually refresh and create the world in a new and radical manner. And I'm assuming we're Christians here, and I'm assuming as Christians we live in the resurrection. And if we live in the resurrection, we're living in a world that's already saved. And our job is to bring forward something for others to see that lets them know the good news. And the good news, in my opinion, is what managers do, which is not to say that all managers are good news, right? I'm not saying that at all. But let me, so I'm going to read, I want to read from the book. And because the title was reading, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read the first page or two and then go to the chapter on reading. So I want you to get a sense of what this book is about. The Liberal Arts of Management, a Toolkit for Today's Leaders. By the way, the hardcover came out 2 years ago. It cost $70. I refuse to talk about it. The paperback is out now. It costs anywhere between $15 and $19. For $15 to $19, I'm selling this book to anyone and everyone, right? If you are part of an educational program and you like what's going on here, make this a required text. This book will teach your students and you what an ancient or medieval humanist was competent and capable of doing. If we approached learning with the skills that I talk about in this book, we would be creating a new world, a world that is humanist at the core, but not secular and not nihilist by nature. Truly, this is it. So, and this is a distillation. This is a simple, simple book. At least I think it is. So, this book is about the liberal arts of management and the management of the liberal arts. It revisits three ancient but radical claims and their links with each other. 1, management is the practice of the liberal arts. 2, mastery of the liberal arts is a managerial task. And 3, the liberal arts as managerial practices are an ethical discipline. From this perspective, what the ancients called practical wisdom, prudence, doing the right thing, mastery of the liberal arts, knowing how and when to use them, and management, getting the right things done, are inseparable. To be virtuous or to be a master of the liberal arts is to be a manager. This is a far cry from how we currently understand management or the liberal arts. We tend to think of the former as applying only to the worlds of business, government, and not-for-profits, and the latter is limited to the study and discussion of ideas. On this view, there's only a slender and incidental link between the two domains. Managerial skills require a modicum of learning. Scholarship requires some sense of organization and the ability to meet deadlines. But an old and well-respected tradition views the purpose of the liberal arts as offering leadership training and guidelines for success. This professional or managerial tradition of the liberal arts begins with the sophists, who taught effective speaking skills as a means for success. For the sophist, no ethical consideration figured into the acquisition of these skills. Their teachings were challenged and reformed by Isocrates, a contemporary of Plato and Aristotle, into the study and application of rhetoric as a moral enterprise. Then Cicero and Quintilian refined the teachings of speaking skills as the study of oratory, saying and doing things with decorum or propriety. The tradition that emerged with Cicero and Quintilian contrasts with the anti-sophist positions that begin with Plato, a more abstract and analytic approach to questioning of meanings in human action. The latter, in all its guises, is far more analytic and professorial than is the managerial and professional. When we speak of the liberal arts, we normally think in terms of academic traditions of great books, great ideas, and the great conversation. This book, however, will focus on the professional tradition of the liberal arts that consists of learning what, when, and how to do things, be it writing a poem, making a speech, setting up an action plan, or leading a country. This tradition teaches competency, effectiveness, timing, and propriety as key aspects of learning. The professional tradition of the liberal arts is far more empathetic and action-oriented than the professorial, which is more analytic and expressive. It has been called at various times sophist, oratorical, or humanist, but these labels are both outdated and misleading. In order to make a clean break from the connotation of these terms and to point out a shocking truth, I call this neglected tradition of the liberal arts the managerial tradition. The phrase makes it clear that the liberal arts are what managers and leaders use to get the job done in today's world. We will see that the managerial tradition of the liberal arts is no less intellectual than the academic tradition, but it uses the intellect in a different way, toward different ends, and for different reasons. It was the tradition that the Renaissance humanist established in rejecting the teaching of medieval scholastic philosophers. The same tradition, with its interest in the classical trivium, grammar, rhetoric, and dialectic, as defined below, has surprisingly reemerged in all its efficacy and relevance in today's world as the practice and discipline of management. Circumstances compelled the rediscovery of the practicality of the liberal arts circumstances compelled the rediscovery of the practicality of the liberal arts for the Renaissance humanists, as they do again today. The difference, however, is that what the 16th century thinkers viewed as a luxury for elites now becomes a necessity for everyone. Learning how to think and act with the liberal arts, the need to master the arts to learn to use them in an appropriate and effective manner, is the #1 prerequisite for understanding and surviving in today's world. The ancient liberal arts are the cutting-edge tools for handling today's challenges. What this means for today's educators and leaders is as much a function of the way modern communication media has changed the planet as it is about the value of the arts. The new media create new languages, each with their own grammars, which need to be learned, each with their own rhetorical biases, which need to be used, and each making real changes in the world, which need to be evaluated. Moreover, these media are continually interacting with each other, creating ever more sophisticated local dialects of their own grammars, rhetorical biases, and analytical needs. These local dialects are actually the impact of specific technology is having in a specific culture. The cell phone creates different effects in the Middle East than it does in Middle America. because the same technology introduced into two different cultures with two different inherent biases will have different effects. Learning how to live with and use these effects in a humane manner is the task of management. The tools to accomplish this task, as we will see, are the old liberal arts understood both as subject matter and practice. In today's global communication environments, we must learn to use the liberal arts as a way of life. It is the ancient art of grammar, rhetoric, and dialectic, i.e. analytic thinking, philosophy, that provide the key to meeting everyday challenges and making sense of our lives. Mastering the liberal arts opened the way for leaders to get the right things done. Ancient ideals become the practices best adapted to the 21st century. As we shall see, it is no surprise that managers and leaders have reinvented and integrated the ancient arts as practice of management. It is precisely this reinvention that this book will explore. I am not suggesting that we need to use the liberal arts to become better managers, but that we need to recognize that they are already being used. Consequently, we must learn how to use them appropriately to avoid the perils of the sorceress apprentice. Management, by its very nature, is the practice of the liberal arts, but as it's taught and practiced today, it fails to understand that as a practice, it is a moral discipline, that the proper use of the liberal arts is a managerial/ethical task. So that's from the introduction of the book, which I just give as a background to let you know where I'm coming from. The Greek word is oikonomikos. Well, I'm not going to go into the Greek. It's the economic, oikonomikos, right? And it means manager, but it means more than manager. It actually means a distributor of the dwelling. Just when you look at the book, it's really, nomos is culture. Culture comes from the Greek word nemen. Nemen means nimble and distributing. So the job of the manager is to be the point guard in the culture. The job of the manager is to make the plays. The job of the manager is to make the team. The job of the leaders to make the team, right? So having said that, I'm now going to go to chapter 2, which is the topic of today's discussion. The grammatical arts of leadership, grammaticos. Every day, managers employ the three liberal arts of the classical trivium, grammar, rhetoric, and dialectic, in order to be more effective leaders. Managers use grammar, which consists of the study of words and the ability to call things by their right names, to read and understand organizations like a book. They use the 5 divisions of rhetoric to innovate and develop entrepreneurial initiatives, and they use dialectic or analytical thinking to evaluate and think things through. Grammar is the ability to read anything for understanding. Here, reading means faces, gestures, people, cultures, organizations, opportunities, as well as poems, novels, and spreadsheets. There are as many different types of reading as there are different types of books, texts in the broadest sense, to read. Anthropologists read cultures like a book, medieval theologians read the world like a book, and managers read organizations like a book. Detachment is the first characteristic of grammar. Reading is the art of detached involvement. In learning to read, we're free to explore new worlds, appreciate them, empathize with them, and yet remain detached and able to appreciate and evaluate them in a critical manner. It gives you the ability to stand back and observe. Teaching management through case studies, as is done in most business schools, is a slide-by-slide approach to evaluate the practices, ethics, and professionalisms of a company. One learned to distinguish a good organization from a bad one by learning to read the differences between effective and ineffective organizations. Similarly, most books on management are a critical analysis of business stories. In them, we find side-by-side analysis to help us discern what excellence and greatness looks like. By the way, that was once the reason people read poetry. The approach exactly parallels the method suggested by Ezra Pound in the ABC of Reading to teach students how to read and appreciate great literature. Pound goes so far as to describe reading as the ability to appreciate the maximal efficiencies of great works of art, much like management studies require the study to identify the maximal efficiencies in great organizations. 2, grammar also includes the study of words and their etymology. It has the task of not only calling things by their right names, but also studying how the meaning of words change over time. This study requires being receptive to those changes and recognizing their implications. This skill requires sensitivity to nuance and meaning. For a manager, it also requires the diligence in staying up to date with best practices and innovation, in the same way that an etymologist keeps abreast of the changing meaning of words and the changing meaning of their context. A highly effective business practice can quickly become obsolete when new technology changes the context of doing business. Thus, understanding the grammar of business includes understanding the changing niche of an industry and the changing role of technologies as they evolve and create new effects. And 3, the third key of a grammarian. Naming things is one of the oldest tasks known to man and is one of the most important acts a manager must learn to be effective in today. Naming things is one of the oldest tasks known to man and is one of the most important arts a manager must learn to be effective in today's kaleidoscopic workplace. Just as, according to Genesis, it was Adam's task to name the animals in the Garden of Eden, it is the task of today's leaders to correctly name the mission and purposes of their organizations. When God asked Adam to name the animal, he was asking him to be a grammarian. When Peter Drucker asked the question, "What business are we in?" he's asking managers and business leaders to do the same thing, to call things by their right names. To know what business you are in means paying attention to nuance and change. It requires the ability to see how changes in markets, products, and material affect you and what you are trying to do as an organization. This is the unique grammatical task of the manager, to call things the way they are. Now, we tend to think of grammar only in terms of proper syntax and rules of usage, but the ancient art of grammar is more about learning how to read and understand things than it is about how to write good sentences by learning to follow the rules. In this fuller sense, grammar focuses on understanding the meaning of things. It studies the way words work in context with other words in order to understand things in their proper context. Because contexts are always shifting, grammarians study an ever-changing tapestry of textual interactivity that requires a specific type of attentiveness. Looked at this way, we can see that Peter Drucker's classic Management Tasks, Responsibilities, and Practices, the book is that thick, is a book of stories using the tools of grammatical exegesis to understand what management is. This is true of many books on leadership, management, and business theories. Drucker's book begins with the story of Sears and teaches us how to read and understand it. It then narrates the Mark and Spencer story and others in an ongoing analysis that reveals the multi-level nature of management practices. In this sense, Drucker is an ancient grammarian utilizing multi-level exegesis to understand the nature of management in its totality. This is true of many books written on management, including many of the books that are bestsellers today. Their topics are different, but they always are the study of business, government, not-for-profit sector stories. The great media critic Marshall McLuhan called this type of grammatical scrutiny the art of multimedia exegesis, because grammar is the study of how words and things work in relationship with other words and things. It deals with interfaces and what those interfaces engender, what they mean, and how they can be understood. The good grammarian is not bound by adherence to rules or a style sheet, but by a perceptive appreciation of shifting meaning and processes. Grammarians learn to pick up context and make sense of them, much as Peter Drucker does in his book on management, or Paul Ekman in his book on reading faces. And I'm going to skip the pound, and I'm just going to give you a little more, and then we can open this up. Okay, so so I'm going a little further. I do a whole thing on how to read Chinese, because Chinese as a writing system is a system of juxtaposed intelligibilities. So that this is what I was afraid of. Oh, see, my biases. Once again, I was proven wrong. Just to give you an idea, so I don't know how many people here can read Chinese. We talked about Chinese in the last session, but this is a mouth in Chinese. If air comes out of the mouth, what you have is a word. And if you put a person next to the mouth, what do you have? A person standing by their word, which means integrity. The Chinese word for integrity is that. I am thoroughly convinced that the manager is forced on a regular basis to actually end up with AI, old technology, you just put it in. Workers who aren't, you just put it all together, you can end up with a Chinese ideogram. Then your job as a manager is to do what? What exactly do we call this? When you're able to call this by its right name, then you know where you are and what you need to do. So this idea of juxtaposing, this simple juxtaposing of parts, is what the Chinese genius does. Now, why do the Chinese do this? It's very important to understand that Chinese is not a phonetic alphabet. Chinese has at least 4, if not more, dialects that are very, very difficult, if not translatable to one another. So in order to keep China integrated, they use a nonverbal writing system so anyone in China could understand Chinese. It has no sound. And the 21st century is Chinese in essence. For example, where's the camera?
It's got you.
Okay. For example, how many people can read? So how many of you can read Chinese? I think you all can. So what does that Chinese word say?
No smoking?
Exactly. How are we handling this globalism on one level? We're handling it by actually inventing a new Chinese. And of course, postmoderns and most academics are looking for the phonetic ground and looking for 1,000 things that have to do with syllabisms and everything else. But this is simple stuff. These are putting things together and then seeing them and calling them something and then using the wisdom to then say, oh, that's where the bathroom is. Oh, I can't park my car here. That oh is part of what managers have to continually do over and over and over again. Oh, I see. We're not getting things done because those things can't be done anymore. But wait, that's part of the job, and that's a liberal arts tool. So I just want to open your eyes. Because it opened my eyes to just give you a sense. I just want to get this to the right place. The study of change. Oh, so I want to, because this is too bad that Renaissance guy left. Today's managers must keep the door open to new possibilities, opportunities, and dangers. They must be always open to learning new things at any time and from anywhere. Does this not sound like an extrapolation from what Hugh of St. Victor had to say in the 12th century text on liberal arts education? Hugh of St. Victor. Humility is the beginning of discipline. And though there are many examples of this, there are these three are especially important to the reader. First, that he should hold no knowledge and no writing cheap. Second, that he should not be ashamed to learn from anyone. And third, that he himself, when he has attained knowledge, should not scorn others. Those are good rules to live by. The study of change is the role of grammar. Initiating and implementing change is the role of rhetoric. Although these roles are defined separately, grammar and rhetoric do not function separately. Grammar discovers changes and their meanings, what services and disservices are being generated. Rhetoric makes changes through its innovations that develop new arrangements and relations, creating new customers and new services. Grammar then explores and evaluates these changes. You read, you look, you see what needs to be done, you create it, and then you test it to see if it makes sense. And if the issue is metaphysics, you make sure that we're not making a metaphysical error that skews our deep understanding of who we are. But once that's okay, you still need to go back to the other two. Dialectic is always present to analyze, so think philosophy. Dialectic is always present to analyze assumptions and check our thinking for consistency. However, dialectic is never autonomous or dominant over grammar and rhetoric, any more than these are dominant over each other. Dialectic belongs to the abstract realm of speculation, evaluating premises, and developing metrical models to track the results. When the bottom line or dialectic is allowed to lead, grammar and rhetoric cease to function in an effective manner because they've left the world of things to serve a world of abstraction, which I think is what I was hearing earlier is a problem. The managerial model of the liberal arts puts grammar at its base, with dialectic, philosophy, serving grammar and rhetoric. St. Thomas Aquinas says that philosophy is the handmaid to theology. And I think if you played that down one, it would be philosophy is the handmaid to oratory and grammar, understood in terms of eloquence and understanding the scripts and the texts that are being presented. The managerial task of the liberal arts is to put grammar at its base, with dialectic serving grammar and rhetoric. The three traditional managerial functions of grammar are exegesis, etymology, and naming things. I've explained that. The ability to appreciate value and understanding the meaning of things on multiple levels, an openness to nuance and change, and the ability to call things by their right names. These functions are managerial to the core. Now, I just want to point this out because, again, remember, I'm writing this backwards. I'm not trying to impose anything anywhere. I'm saying, gee, this is what we're doing. Has this ever been done before? And lo and behold, yes, it has. It's actually what people were being taught 200 years ago. And it's clearly what was at the core of ancient learning. So when you hear this, please understand I'm not I'm not saying, oh, let's see, I'm not imposing. I'm discovering in the sense of discovering. I'm looking and saying, gee, where have I seen this before, or is this really new? Exegesis, and I'm only going to read about exegesis because it's, I think, it sort of gives you a sense of what the book's about. Dante tells us that writing, like reading, is a polysemous activity, by which he means that it is conducted on many levels at once. The meaning of a text is multi-level and interactive, and this is Dante. It should be known that writing can be understood and ought to be expounded chiefly in 4 senses. The first is called literal, and this is the sense that does not go beyond the strict limits of the letter. The second is called allegorical, and this is disguised under the cloak of such stories, and is truth hidden under a beautiful fiction. The third sense is moral, and this sense is that for which teachers ought, as they go through writing, intend to watch for their own profit. And the fourth is called anagogic. That is above the sense, and this occurs when writing is spiritually expounded, and likewise gives intuition to higher matters. Remarkably, these 4 levels of exegesis laid out by Dante correspond well to the 4 levels of managerial leadership needed to understand or read the nature of an organization. Understood as narratives, organizations can be approached in ways strictly analogous to the written text. In fact, we would argue that a managerial organization is nothing but the 4 levels of exegesis at work in the world. So the literal I call the whole story. The literal level is the place where everything happens and is expressed. In a text, this is the place where the author writes down all the words. It is the place of authority or authorship. In an organization, this is the place leadership manifests itself in everything that goes on in an organization. It is the Enron story, the story of enterprise, the story of the Boys Club of America. The literal level is the place where creation and creativity manifest themselves. The literal level is the work of art or the managed organization. In written books, this is the text. In mythic terms, it is the world created through and by the myth. In management, it is leadership at work in an organization expressed by everything that organization is or does. The literal level is the place where a managerial case study begins and ends. It begins with everything an organization entails, and it ends by relating everything to the realities of the organizations. Its words, people, processes, products, attitudes, feelings, biases, prejudices, errors, efficiencies, and inefficiencies. It is this fidelity to what literally keeps the grammarian or the manager rooted in reality. The literal is, what are we looking at here? Allegory. Allegory managerially is best practices and applicability. The next level is the allegorical, is the how-to level of transferable practices. This is the level of tools and techniques, the level of best practices and competencies needed to get the job done. It is also where an organization maps out what happens when these practices are or are not followed. This is where one learns to apply the story to other similar situations. Allegory tends to be univocal and locked in techniques of correctness and incorrectness. Do things one way and this happens. Do them another way and something else happens. The allegorical realm is the realm of predictable results. It is the realm of know-how and doing things right. In this regard, people might read the Wall Street Journal or the Harvard Business Review, go to conferences to pick up best practices or identify with operations that have similar stories so they can apply them. The third level, according to Dante, is the tropological, and that's the level of ethics and creativity. The third level is the can-do or tropological level. The word tropos means turning and usually connotes the creativity of the innovator, opportunist, or entrepreneur. Homer describes Odysseus as polytropic, a man of many devices and skills, with the ability to read situations and the creativity to overcome their challenges. But the word tropological also relates to moral conduct. Thus, it is not merely the level that showcases the innovative and entrepreneurial genius of an organization. It is also the level where the ethical choices that make up the morality of an organization or culture are developed. At the topological level, an organization develops mission statements to talk the talk, creates new products, develops new strategies, establishes their tone, and decides how to go about their work. Here, ethics and creativity go hand in hand. Something can be done, but should we do it, given what we know as an organization? This is the level of character, styles, and possibilities. And the fourth level is the level of does-do, the anagogic. It includes the actual deeds, results, and accomplishments upon which a company's reputation, values, and brand are expressed. Of the four levels, the anagogical is the hardest to translate, in part because there is very little scholarship on the classical or pre-Christian use of the term. If we take Aquinas' definition of anagogy as what relates to eternal glory, and understand glory to mean, as Cicero puts it, to be remembered for worthy deeds, then the anagogical is the place where the organization stands out and sets an example. To brand. The ancient Greek word anagogy means to lead upward, anagogy, which entails a sense of breakthrough or epiphany. In the religious texts of the Middle Ages and early Renaissance, this level relates to a religious lesson leading us to the glory of God. In modern business context, the anagogical level is the place of trustworthiness created on evidence and accountability. Thus, anagogy focuses on the brand, as Scripture brands the eternal glory of Christ in everything it says and does. Deeds in the business, whole brand, the knowledge, etc. The anagogical level of managerial exegesis is well expressed by the titles of books like Built to Last, In Pursuit of Excellence, and From Good to Great. So I know it's a lot. I'm just going to read you the last paragraph of the book to just give you a sense of what the purpose is. The last two paragraphs. And I hope you got a little sense of me just playing with one sliver of what reading is, right? Management, in my opinion, is the crowning achievement of the liberal arts. It is a practice and not merely a course of study. It's what makes us useful, happy, and mature adults. But this is the barest of adumbrations. The next step is learning how to use the great cultures and traditions of our planet as a treasure chest of best practices and managerial insights. To do this, we must learn to study them managerially, using all the tools of grammar, rhetoric, and dialectic discussed in this book. Reading the great traditions, globalism, reading the great traditions managerially is to read them in an ancient manner. It is not to condemn, instruct, or deconstruct them, but to learn from them. When we apply the liberal arts of management to the study of the liberal arts, we retrieve ancient sensibilities of learning and learn how to put them to use. So that's the book. And I want people to buy it. I want programs to read it. I think your kids should take a look at it, because by learning how managers think, if they apply it in school, they will be by nature inclined to a humanism that's geared toward getting the right things done, and right meaning good things, and right meaning there are many, many right things that can be done. It's an analogical notion. So anyway, long, I just wanted to make sure you got the text. Thank you very much. So.
Any other questions, or what we
Yes. How do you want to arrange that? Just stay where it is and
relax?
Why don't I relax? I love that idea.
I mean, I gotta say your strength for you and Bob to go around too.
Excellent, James. Thank you much.
Don't relax that far away.
Oh. Yeah, that's right.
We also
Yes.
have, by the way, I've got a discount form, so if anyone wants, you can get it even in the discount. The key is, if you're part of an organization that's a teaching organization, they require text. You can't go wrong. You can use half of it. $15 a pop. I just bought it on Kindle for $9.99. I would read along with you. $10, so good. No, but I'm gonna put it on my sophistry shelf with the red. I want to see Jim's reaction.
No, I didn't.
Well, you're getting royalties from it. Question?
Oh. All right, so, no. I agree. I'm in management, my position is supervisor, so I got eight economists reporting to me. And I agree that there is a, they call it dearth of liberal arts thinking in management. I assume that you direct the book to all level managers.
Why is it not for managers at all?
The book is for you. The book is for people who are reading like they're teaching you in school right now, instead of reading like managers. The book is essentially saying is this is the way managers read on multi-levels. Oh, wait a second. That's the way Gregory of Nyssa read. That's the way Dante read. People used to read in depth. The meaning of the book wasn't simply some kind of meaning. So the book is not for managers. The book is actually saying if you're not a manager, you can't read.
That only high level managers are actually find themselves needing to utilize the skills that we discussed. They actually find themselves, but that's not that happened many years in an organization. And then they finally say, oh, okay, I have to have some kind of sense of culture.
Okay, good point.
That's why I said, what level are you talking about? You know, so who are you referring to? I know what you're talking about.
The last,
I know there's
yeah,
a need.
no, well, actually, I'm glad you said that. The last chapter of the book makes it very, very clear that ethics is a managerial task. And everyone is called to be ethical. To be ethical, you must be a manager. Period. That's my argument. If you're a manager, you may not be ethical, but if you're ethical, you must be a manager, because good managers are effective. They do the right things. And as Aquinas says, prudence is doing the right things for the right reasons. So to do the right thing, you must be a manager. To be prudent, you must know the right reasons. The right reasons are a function of the oratorical tradition, having to do with elocutio, or style, which always knows the appropriate act in the right place. So to be effective and good, you must be effective, and you must have a sense of tradition and sensibility. So this is not about management. I'm actually arguing that the model for a human, we were talking about earlier, that to be a person is to be a manager by necessity, but sufficient. It's necessary, but not sufficient. That you have the skills of a manager to be a good person.
I think you mentioned this in the beginning. You actually mentioned economicos. You actually mentioned, and that's a person in the household who utilize it, it's essential for them to have skills of management in the household. So you're talking about management in the broad sense, where right, that what business management can.
What's ecology? The ego of the laws is the ego of the norms. So the idea here is that the ego is the race. It's the race. Race of the tigers that are living in the new household, which is the household of the election. We're being told to preserve laws and also articulate and do and a lot the normals. Don't think about a household like mother and father. The household is the planet, and the house. And there are many rooms in my father's mansion. This idea is we're here on earth to do housekeeping. My job is to be a housekeeper with you, and then with your stewardship. I got right. So, but I'm looking for a word that's so stark and so hard for people to grasp. So they would have to be forced to take a look at the arts I'm talking about.
Desperately confused philosophical to Mr. Principals of my employees. Turns out that my team is very high performing. My team is very high performing. So I see what you mean. It's not just industry managers can benefit from it, but it's anyone. Yeah, anyone.
Freshman orientation in every college.
But
And by the way,
okay, but wait a minute. You don't make a distinction between managers and leaders. You say it's the same. I don't think leaders manage. They lead.
It's gonna get fun. Well, no, I wrote an article on this. That it's called followership.
I know there's a big argument. But I know managers can be leaders. But leaders don't necessarily have to be managers. I know there's a big argument. I think in your talk, in your book, you read managers. You said managers, leaders. I'm like, leaders don't necessarily have to be managers.
Well, actually, leaders absolutely have to be managers. Because part of your job as a leader is to know what needs to be done. How do you know what needs to be done? If either someone's telling you what to do, at which point you're not a leader, or you're doing what? You're reading, not broad sense, you're reading the situation. And where's the meaning in this situation? In you? It's in the situation. You have to read what's being asked for you. That's not according to. No, that's according to Aquinas. Gotta talk into this thing. I mean,
in a sense.
no, he's got a question.
Not so much a question as a comment. I remember a definition of the liberal arts as the tools by which free men rule. I was actually taken from, I think, Professor Michael Drought. He actually had a lecture series about how to think the liberal arts. So I think you would agree in that.
Leadership, strictly speaking, or analogously. And strictly speaking, the leader has to communicate. But what the leader has to communicate is proportionate equality, or strictly speaking, the quality of inequality. That the person who's a leader, right, has some sort of a capability, a talent, a skill that inclines other people to take direction, and the leader does not have to speak. The leader can simply walk into the room, right, and dominate the situation, because that person will have some sort of what we call charisma, and people will be inclined to listen. That you just have that quality. In a sense, you would be the person who's a leader but not a manager. Right? But in most situations, that's not the case. Yeah, well, I don't.
What a leader is, no, he says there's a difference between a leader and leadership. So a leader is anyone who has followers. So a highly charismatic person, if they're charismatic in a Christian sense, are people that are going to be okay. But if they're not charismatic in a Christian sense, if they have the ability where they're themselves very hurtful and attract people who are also either hurt or want to be hurtful, they're leaders, but they're not conveying leadership if leadership means following the grammar of the situation. Because the grammar of the situation is always rooted in being, and because it's rooted in being, is always pointing to an ordination to being in the mystery of what it means to be human. I'm saying a leader is anyone with followers. Leadership is always good. That's right. Leadership is always good.
The challenge in that statement is leadership is always good is that man is fallen. So, and he lacks perfection. So how do we describe the captain on the battlefield in Afghanistan who marvels at the leadership of his opponent, an ISIS commander, who with stunning lack of resources coordinates the battle. He sees his opponent, who is the enemy, who is bad in the sense of a bad cause, but doing the art of leading soldiers well.
That's how I see it as being a bad cause. Which is good.
Well, that's right. Well, then it becomes an apparent versus real.
There's two things here. First thing is the book is simply about
So I would say, in a little analysis of what you just suggested here, a person who's deeply committed to war and winning will look at a person who's the enemy, and if they are good at war and winning, will marvel and learn from them, and will say something like, this guy knows how to get things done. He's a good commander, right? What skills do you need to do that? You need, read. You need to be able to read them. So my argument is the skill of reading is what's needed, number one. Number two, you also need to make sure that you don't fall for the idea that art is the essence of who we are. Because if you think art and technique are the essence of who we are, you think, gee, I just want to be like this person. I want to have the same ability, right? But that's not who we are. We're human, and we're people who have to have at the core of our being a sense of prudence, a sense of doing good or doing better. So there's no reason why I wouldn't learn from somebody who's not doing good. The key thing is I don't do what they're doing when I learn what I'm learning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so if we think, where's the region, you know this, I'm sure, where Aristotle says, the one of every argument, every inquiry, every action, every pursuit is something aimed at something good. And for this reason, the good is rightly declared to be that of which all things. So now we have two opponents, locked in combat, or locked in competition, or locked in a geopolitical, each with their understanding of the good. Could easily develop into a relativistic view of who's to say your good is better than mine.
No. No. I don't think so. But anyway,
Okay, but if so for
relativism is saying there's no good.
so yeah,
You say whose good is better, you're not a relativist.
no, I'm sorry, I meant,
When you say there's no good, you're a relativist. All goods are the same. When two people say, I know what's good, neither of them are relativists.
yeah, each one has a sense of hierarchy of what they believe is good.
So there's no relativism there.
But if they
There
say,
might be error there. No, there's no relativism.
okay, that's a nice thing. But is there leadership occurring on both sides? So when we fought Hitler, was Hitler a leader?
You know, so for what it's worth, these are all good questions, but they're all running away from the book. The book is saying you need to learn to be able to read things, and we're now at level 5, right? And I'm saying that given the fact that most colleges don't even teach the liberal arts, many of them don't even call the liberal arts, and the fact that I'm in the presence of Christian educators who have a commitment to the liberal arts, my understanding is you should be grabbing this book and saying, let's get people to read this and use it as a tool to talk about the liberal arts. Now, if there's a danger here, it's a danger that I'm saying philosophy is not a leadership tool. And when I say that, it may go against the thinking in the room, but it doesn't go against the thinking of the planet. So, but it doesn't take away from the fact that the arts that need to be learned can be learned from managers today and then applied to topics other than soap. You can go back and you could read Shakespeare like you'd be reading Apple
on 4 levels, and lo and behold, Shakespeare would be teaching you things that you can't learn now. Because no one even knows this. You understand what I'm trying to say? And in the next talk, this is the book is not about this. That's interesting stuff. It's not about this. This is about learning, the importance of learning. And it's not thinking. It's not thinking only. Why don't we,
But I think it also applies to leaders. People call themselves leaders reading the work, expanding your market, in the sense that most people who are in positions of leadership in organizations, in actuality, don't possess the skill. So, yeah, okay. So it would also apply of leadership, of leading. Right, right. Because I think what you're talking about is that being possessed of that skill requires a moral culture, right? Well, okay. Well, let me. Well, to the extent that you're not a total anarchist. No, I'm right. Yes, but I'm talking more universally. Okay, that is, you're saying you have to have, in order to be able to lead, you have to have some sense of organization. Yeah. Well, leadership only occurs within an organization.
that's not what I said.
Well, then,
It's true, but it's not what I said. I said in order to lead, you need skills of grammar and oratory. Oratory is a 5-division process.
right. But
Clearly laid out. It's
right.
not some simple boilerplate. And the oratorical tradition is talking about invention, the ability to see innovation, painting.
Right.
There's a whole lot of stuff going on.
Right. Yeah, I understand that. I understand
I
that.
understand that.
No.
But most people don't. The book is not for you, it's for most people. I mean, now, I can listen to what, now, see, here's the deal. Here's the confusion. Art and ethics are not the same. What you're calling a leader is an artist.
No.
Yes, because it's like, how do I accomplish it? How do I get the market share? How do I do this? How do I create the work of art? How do I do what I want to do? How do I make something that has the right effect?
Somebody who just by nature without doing anything. That's a big problem.
Give me an example.
A woman who's dropped dead beautiful and walks into the room.
She's a leader.
Oh, yeah. You know? Yeah, that's in other words, that there's an inequality that's been created, and this person says, well, I'm in control. Now, there. Yeah.
There's a powerful dynamic that you see introduced. There's certain critical parts that you have this short rest of pharmacology. It's fascinating to me how you identify critical parts necessary. Like everything, ability to read anything from understanding.
Right.
And then later you say, managers must call things by their right names. In other words, their ability. Then you have some good, interesting examples. So to me, like Drucker said, yeah, right. You're able to name the thing, and then as a result, you're communicating.
I'm sure as a result you get rich. The person who does that is the winner.
Yeah, but
It's not a simple thing.
no, not at all.
Okay. And we're always in some organization.
Yes.
Okay. So there is always some sort of leader being led relationship. Always.
Well, what there is what you guys would call leadership. Listen, what's your point?
Okay. the point is that,
You need the liberal arts to know computer.
yes,
Why?
yes, yes, you need the, but you don't need the liberal arts to have organization, okay? You need the liberal arts to have management, okay? Because the liberal arts help you, given that an organization exists, given that you recognize you belong to it, it helps you to overcome resistance. It exists always and everywhere. Yeah, God, I'm making the universe. Well, then, the universe, in other words, you're always, it's a created order, okay? Even with de Blasio, it's somewhat a created order.
It's an interesting conversation. My argument, my point is, without these tools, we're dead. Well, and the point here, well, no, then the next step is, how do we get these tools out to people? This other stuff, I'd be glad to come in and do a whole workshop on leadership and talk about leadership in Aquinas and not talk about philosophy once.
The organization exists. If this organization is some sort of order, hierarchy, leadership, okay? Whether it's like what Richard Bloom talked about, the bureaucracy, the headless bureaucracy. It's there, okay? But what the important thing, as you're saying, is you've got, as far as I understand it, is you got to focus on management.
What's there, Peter? What's there allegorically? What's there sociologically? What's there anarchically? What's the literal there you're talking about? If you read, it's not just there, it's very clearly discernible.
Yeah.
Why does that distinguish word?
Right.
He's not saying it's just there.
The organization, the unity is there. The perfection of the act is not there. The perfection of the act is going to be generated by good management. To have the good management, you have to have the communication skills. Yes, but, yeah.
Management is fundamentally rhetorical and always good. I believe you can see management is manager.
Yeah, I can understand what you said. That strictly speaking.
Bad managers, there are managers. There are not good managers. There are managers who are by definition good, and there are bad managers. Bad if you either don't hit your numbers or you're a manager. Good, you're getting the job done.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Good is what a manager is.
Yeah, because otherwise you're not managing. Yeah, I understand.
I'm not willing to commit to a good manager. Manager means.
Yeah, it's like roof, good roof. It's like saying that, a roof with a hole and it's not a roof. I get it.
Anyway, this is the thing. Look, 1599. I really find it fascinating.
No, I'm not denying that, but in order to have the possibility of learning, you have to have good, better, best within a genus. You have positive, comparative, superlative, movement toward perfection, right? Within the organization, right? In which case you have a qualitative order of perfection in management.
No, it's talking like this actually. Peter, what does grammar mean? If you're reading something, it has a form, doesn't it? So no one's saying there is no form. No one's saying there is no form. There's nothing about there not being an organization. Well, in terms of the book, not in terms of the way you're laying out. The form is the literal sense. It's the literal sense. It's everything that makes up the organization, including the way it works and what it doesn't. And it's defined. It's finite. So that's the book. It's got a literal sense. When you take a look and you say, gee, what's literally here? You then say, well, look, it looks like they're doing this, this, and this. They're doing it better over there.
And what I'm saying is that the contribution that a manager will likely focus on and get out of this work is overcoming resistance and inclining people to be receptive. And that's the moral dimension.
Let go of organization. It is to be a manager. When you're walking down the street, this is what you're doing. It's not about an organization. It's about you're dealing with another person face to face. You're actually in a managerial context doing what managers do. What? Well, I wouldn't. I mean, if someone wanted to, I wouldn't. The word organization is not in my vocabulary. I don't need it. But if you want to use it, I just don't want to make sure you're not using it the wrong way. But you're mistaking manager for business. We're not talking about business. We're talking. This is the liberal arts.
In the same way that it's an order, the different orders.
I'm talking about when you meet and when you're reading each other.
Right.
We're looking to see what we are interested in. We're treating each other with a sense of dignity that's elocutio. We have memory. We have things to do, and we spend time acting in a way that's about delivery. So I never said that. That's right.
You're entering into a different order where you're walking along the street and you might be being lost and you're trying to find your location and you run into a friend. And I've entered a different organization. I've entered a different relationship. And the communication then becomes different. It's a qualitatively different genus that you've entered.
I don't see anything contradictory here. I don't know important book. I see a contradiction. Why would it discount it? No, that's not what I think. It's a difference in terminology. I understand. I think he's engaging in other relationships.
He wants to really tell me what he thinks.